Welcome to Historical Hindsight, where we dive deep into history's most fascinating decisions. And today we're talking about Switzerland, the country that looked at World War II and basically said, "New phone, who dis?" Picture this. It's 1939, the world is descending into chaos, and Switzerland is sitting there like that friend who stays neutral during a group drama, except this drama involves tanks and battleships. Before we dive in, let me paint you a picture of Switzerland in the 1930s. Imagine being surrounded by potential chaos, like living in an apartment between a heavyweight boxer and an angry opera singer. You're going to want to keep both doors locked and pretend you're not home. That was basically Switzerland's strategy, except instead of noisy neighbors, they had Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. Now you might be thinking, how does a country just opt out of the biggest conflict in human history? Well, my friends, it's a bit more complicated than just putting on noise-canceling headphones and pretending the war isn't happening. Switzerland's neutrality was actually a carefully crafted policy that took centuries to perfect. Kind of like that one friend who's mastered the art of avoiding group projects while still getting an A. Let's rewind a bit to understand how Switzerland became the world's most famous fence-sitter. Back in 1815, at the Congress of Vienna, European powers officially recognized Swiss neutrality. It's like getting a doctor's note excusing you from PE. Except this note excused Switzerland from European wars for the next few centuries. The Swiss had already been practicing neutrality since 1516, which means they were before it was cool. The original hipsters of international relations. But here's where it gets interesting. And by interesting, I mean morally complicated enough to make a philosophy professor need a drink. Switzerland's neutrality during World War II wasn't just about staying out of the fight. They were playing a game of diplomatic twister that would make a contortionist jealous. On one hand, they were surrounded by Axis powers and needed to maintain some level of economic cooperation to survive. On the other hand, they were trying to maintain their democratic values and independence while not explicitly taking sides. Let's talk about the Swiss strategy, which I like to call the hedgehog defense. Just like a hedgehog, Switzerland made itself really prickly and uncomfortable to mess with. They had this thing called the National Redoubt strategy, basically turning their entire country into a giant fortress. They rigged every bridge, tunnel, and mountain pass with explosives, ready to blow them all up if anyone invaded. It's like saying, sure, you could try to take over our country, but we'll make it about as pleasant as eating a cactus sandwich. The Swiss military strategy was essentially to make invasion so costly and annoying that no one would bother. They armed pretty much every adult male citizen and trained them regularly. Imagine if your local accounting firm was also a part-time militia. That's basically what Switzerland was like. They had this system where soldiers kept their military equipment at home, including rifles. It's the only country where "I forgot my gun at home" could be a legitimate excuse for being late to work. But here's where things get really spicy. Switzerland's economic relationships during the war, they were like that one friend who somehow manages to stay friends with everyone in a divorced couple. They conducted business with both Allied and Axis powers, which, as you can imagine, made everyone slightly suspicious. The Swiss banks accepted gold from Nazi Germany while also providing intelligence to the Allies. It's like playing both sides of a chess game while pretending you're just the referee. One of the most controversial aspects was the Swiss banking system's role in handling Nazi gold and assets. Swiss banks accepted deposits from both victims of the Nazi regime and the Nazis themselves. It's a bit like running a lost and found booth where some items were actually stolen. Not a great look in hindsight. This aspect of Swiss neutrality has led to decades of ethical debates and eventual settlements in the 1990s. But let's talk about the humanitarian side, because it wasn't all morally ambiguous banking practices. Switzerland accepted about 300,000 refugees during the war, which is pretty impressive for a country smaller than some U.S. states. Although, to be fair, they also turned away many others, leading to one of history's biggest "we could have done better" moments. The Swiss also played a crucial role as a neutral intermediary. They were like the world's diplomatic Switzerland. Wait, that's redundant. They were the meeting point where opposing sides could negotiate, exchange prisoners, and conduct diplomatic business. Think of them as the UN before the UN existed, except with better chocolate and more accurate watches. Now, was Switzerland's neutrality successful? Well, if success means avoiding being drawn into the most destructive conflict in human history, then yes. They managed to maintain their independence, preserve their democracy, and keep their economy relatively intact. It's like being the only person who doesn't get food poisoning at a sketchy buffet, technically a win, but the method might raise some eyebrows. However, Switzerland's neutrality came with some serious ethical baggage. Their economic dealings with Nazi Germany have been a source of controversy and soul-searching for decades. It's like maintaining your perfect attendance record by coming to school with the flu. Technically impressive, but maybe not the most responsible choice. The Swiss approach to neutrality during WWII has had lasting implications for international relations. They've maintained their neutral stance through the Cold War and into the modern era, though they've adapted their policies to align more with humanitarian principles. It's like they took their WWII experience and said, same concept, but maybe with more moral clarity this time. What can we learn from Switzerland's WWII neutrality? First, sometimes staying neutral isn't as simple as just not picking a side. It requires careful balancing, strategic thinking, and occasionally some morally questionable decisions. Second, being neutral doesn't mean being passive. Switzerland was actively defending its neutrality through military preparation and diplomatic maneuvering. In the modern context, Switzerland's WWII experience raises interesting questions about neutrality in an interconnected world. Can true neutrality exist in today's global economy? Is it possible to stay neutral in the face of clear moral wrongs? These are questions that continue to challenge international relations scholars and anyone who's ever tried to avoid taking sides in a friend group argument. So there you have it. Switzerland's neutrality during WWII, a complex cocktail of self-preservation, strategic thinking, and occasional moral flexibility. It's a reminder that sometimes the most interesting historical decisions aren't the dramatic choices to fight, but the careful, calculated choices to stay out of the fight entirely. As we wrap up, remember that Switzerland's experience shows us that neutrality isn't just about saying no to war. It's about creating conditions where peace becomes the most practical option. It's like being the designated driver of international relations. Maybe not the most exciting role, but somebody's got to do it. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into diplomatic drama and strategic fence-sitting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, sometimes the best move in a game is deciding not to play at all, unless it's chess. In chess, you definitely need to move your pieces.